Just loading now, and it'll be momentarily. Councilor Ridgema, we are now live on YouTube.
Thank you. I'm just going to read. Thank you. I'm just going to read this motion one more time because Madam Mayor lost connectivity, and we'll vote on it, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. The motion is that Council receive and file as information the following delegations regarding regional update regarding community safety and face coverings. Anna Murray, Executive Director, Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, and Stephanie Hicks, Executive Director, Beamsville Downtown BAA. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Please unmute your mic as I call your name. Councilor Bernay.
Yay.
Councilor McPherson.
Yay.
Councilor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councilor Pachariva.
Yay.
Councilor Reimer.
Yay.
Councilor Ridgema.
Yay.
Councilor Russell.
Yay.
Councilor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item 6.3 on the agenda, regional update regarding community safety and face coverings. This, for those watching tonight, is the report that was generated at the regional level for regional council to consider last Wednesday, and it's been presented to us for information purposes. We don't have a staff member presenting the report as we might typically if it were a report created by our staff. So we will, after an introduction by our CAO, move on to the questions portion. We've all had a chance to review the regional report as it was distributed to us on Friday. Mr. CAO?
Through you, Madam Chair, to all of Council, thanks for the opportunity once again to speak to you. Just to provide some clarity, maybe first and foremost, I will highlight that both the region and local area municipalities can potentially have jurisdiction in this area. And what I mean by that is that if you take St. Catharines, for example, should St. Catharines move forward with their mask bylaw and pass it and enact it, and then should the region move forward with their bylaw and enact it, if those two are different, then members of the public, albeit confusing, would have to adhere to both bylaws. However, should the region move forward with a bylaw, that bylaw will apply to the entire Niagara region, and individuals would have to adhere to that one bylaw. I start with making that statement only to highlight that I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and some people are asking, does the local area municipality need to make or take a position or make a decision on this, or is it a regional decision? And I guess my answer is potentially both. However, as I've said, if the region chooses to do it, then the local area municipality does not need to move forward in that particular area. So just a little bit of a recap. Last week, on Wednesday, there was a discussion at Niagara Region where by a vote of 16 to 15, there was a deferral after about 4.5 hours to move this discussion, this deliberation, this decision to a July 23rd meeting. There was a lot of information shared by both the medical officer of health and the respective staff that were there, and a lot of questions posed by members of council. As you said, Chair Rinchima, there is a report that council has read as it relates specifically to this particular topic, and that speaks to Dr. Mustafa Herji's advice. And I'll just take one piece out of it. He has said and did say in that report that masks are a useful second line of defense against COVID-19. However, as I think has been reported and we've heard, he was not recommending a bylaw at that particular point in time, citing his opinion that it was more of a political decision. That being said, it is back on the agenda, July 23rd. I think we are all monitoring and watching what's happened. Some of our colleagues across Niagara Region, as I said earlier in my introduction of Ms. Murray and Ms. Hicks, are also discussing and or deliberating the matter this evening. and that includes Niagara-on-the-Lake that currently has a council meeting going on at the same time as ours, as well as St. Catharines. And so we'll continue to update members of council on what we hear from our neighboring municipalities, but this will be a regional topic on the 23rd of July. So I don't know if Mayor Easton has anything further to add as a member of regional council who was there and spoke to it.
Thank you, Mr. Kokopoulos. That was going to be my next question, and that is, if council does have questions to this report, who would be the most appropriate person to answer them?
Through you, or to you, Madam Chair, I think if they're related specifically to the debate, I've tried to bring myself up to speed. I can definitely try to answer any questions council may have, and of course, Mayor Easton participating and being part of the debate can also answer questions.
Okay, thank you. So do members of council have any questions or comments about the regional report? Mayor Easton may be able to answer questions. Mr. Kokopoulos may be able to address them. And a reminder that each will have 2 opportunities to ask questions under this item on the agenda. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, possibly to the CAO, but also possibly to Mr. Smith regarding perhaps his interpretation of the bylaw as it was outlined. This goes back to my original question to Ms. Murray about how the impact would be with phase 3 reopening plans, in particular to our hospitality sector with indoor dining. Can you give any insight into how indoor dining would be possible if the mask or mandatory mask was implemented?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll look to Dan if he's got any more clarity. I think, Councillor, in all that I've read and seen, both from municipalities that were early on here, Toronto, Wellington County as well, that's got a very thorough bylaw. I think as it relates specifically to the eating of food, the mask is not mandatory during that particular phase of the experience, so to speak. But I'll let Mr. Smith chime in from an enforcement bylaw expertise perspective.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't think I know that there's a difference between some of the businesses and what and how the mask bylaw would work. I haven't seen this one specifically, but I have been following through with a lot of the other ones that the municipalities are putting in place. But as it relates to dining, my understanding from the other bylaws in a consistent fashion that a lot of the eating establishments are not requiring their patrons to use masks other than the staff. The staff would either have to have a face shield or a mask. Again, I can't speak specifically to the Niagara one, but I would assume it would be somewhat similar. But that's what you'd probably be looking at for the eating establishments. I don't see it being much different than that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So I would assume that would also go towards drinking, wine tasting, any of those indoor activities that, again, we really do stress for our tourists and local population in Lincoln as an opportunity to grow some revenue. So it's very at least positive to hear that if it were to come in, that those industries wouldn't be affected. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. So far, I don't see any other hands up. I have Councillor McCulloch. I do have a question, but I'll wait for Council to go through the list. Councillor McCulloch, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you to, my guess is Dan Smith, should there be a indoor mask bylaw, how would this affect indoor sports? If you know, there's certain sports that, you know, they're by nature, there's going to be close contact within 6 feet. Let's say hockey. Are hockey players going to have to be wearing masks while wearing hockey, as well as visors and face shield or cages? And how would that be enforced, or who would enforce that? The referee or the mask police?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's similar to how the eating establishments will be. It's going to be unique to that specific type of operation and what they feel is appropriate and what the public health would recommend as an operation that would require masks. I guess they'd be looking at what the other potential health risks would be, or what the benefit to the event that's occurring would be. Again, I don't know specifically how that would look, but that would be something I would say would have a specific regulation to it that may be different than somebody just going to a grocery store or some other shopping venue. So I think time will tell a little bit. We'll get more information probably in the coming weeks, but that one would likely have a unique label to it.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And through you, Madam Chair, the reason why I ask is because this is something that's transmitted through droplets, or through moisture, that's emitted. And I just, knowing the sport itself, there's a lot of that sort of thing going on, and hockey is that sort of a game of contact. And I'm not sure how that game is going to look, or how the enforcement of a possible mask, wearing of a mask bylaw would affect that, or soccer for that matter, or any outdoor close contact sport. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. A lot of questions still. Mr. CAO, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want to speak to Councillor Mikulic's question?
Through you, Madam Chair, I did. And I just wanted to speak of the point around enforcement. I think enforcement, or the word enforcement, has been raised a lot when we consider masks. And I think my comment to the matter of enforcement, and again, it was raised at multiple tables, multiple councils, I think are grappling. It would be are grappling, I think, with the issue. And so the way I look at enforcement, and I'm going to quote our soonly departed manager of bylaw, education and compliance, I think, is the approach that you're going to see us move forward with when we look at something like a bylaw like this to enforce, for lack of a better word. Education and compliance has always been our approach. There is no way one could foreseeably enforce this in the way I think that we typically view enforcement. Whereas, to use Councillor, your comment around the enforcement police or the mask police, in no way does one or do I see this being that type of situation or falling into that category, for the very point that we just aren't equipped as local area municipalities to be able to do that level of enforcement. So education will be key, compliance will be key. There will be a sort of honor system and an onus put on businesses, as you're seeing in, I think, a number of jurisdictions, a little bit of a downloading to the local area municipalities to undertake and work with businesses to make sure that businesses know what the bylaw is and what they should be doing when residents enter their establishments. Of course, you're not going to get 100% compliance, I think, with this particular issue. And so continuing to educate, Dan could give you, I think, hundreds of examples where he's spent countless hours with residents, educating them on social distancing, on hand washing, on why we are doing some of the things we're doing to protect our communities. And so I think we say enforcement's tough, and I completely agree with you, but I think it's going to be a very different enforcement approach should we move forward with this.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I use the term mask police because it's a term that's being thrown around as far as people, residents, or not in our necessarily a municipality, but in others that are calling bylaw officers on an ongoing basis seeking enforcement. Another question I have is with this subject. So the wearing of mask is a good secondary a method of reducing the transmission or possible transmission of this disease. when physical distancing is challenging. Now, is it possible that face masks could become mandatory as well? Because really, you still run the risk of contracting this disease through your eyes. And the masks are a good secondary measure. However, it's not 100%. You know, ideally you want to wear a face mask as well, so that if somebody is speaking within 6 feet of you, there's a lesser chance of contracting or receiving any droplets or moisture from another individual during a conversation where physical distancing could be challenged. Is there a risk of that occurring moving forward?
Councillor Mikulik, I, having reviewed the Regent's report and the bylaw, didn't see any comment about face shields or speculation as to next steps in that regard. So I'm not sure that anybody here can really speak to that. If we do have more comprehensive discussion in the future with a report from our staff, that might be a time to ask a question like that. But I'm not sure that anybody can speak to that in the what's going to happen in the next steps in regards to shields.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think 2 months ago we were having this discussion either. So that's why I bring it up now, that depending on how things progress moving forward in the future, how decisions are made moving forward in the future could influence further decisions.
Okay, I see the mayor's hand up and the CAO's hand up. Were you speaking to Mr. Mikulik, Councillor Mikulik's question?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor? Okay,
Yes,
go
as
ahead.
well.
Madam Chair.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I
Mayor,
can tell you the deferral motion at the region, and there has been some criticism about the fact that we would be looking to a large center such as Mississauga. However, it was very specifically related to the work that they had done on the definition in consideration of what constitutes face covering. And so I think it's a very, very good question. And I'm anticipating, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Mikulik, that there's going to be more light shed on this in time for the 23rd. Thank you.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you.
CAO. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. Councillor, I think I'd answer your question along the lines of both Chair Regima and the mayor, and saying, I don't think we know. I think our hope is that we get as much clarity as possible. I think the challenge is that the epidemiology of this particular virus continues to evolve, for lack of a better word. And so I think information directives and so forth will continue to evolve like they have in the various phases of our response and our recovery. I would also add that Toronto, specific to your question around hockey, and Toronto was one of the first to develop this, followed by Peel, of which Mississauga is the municipality within Peel. But eating establishments, when you're actually eating, and athletics are exempt from the mandatory mask bylaw in Toronto. So again, I think there's examples where a lot of these issues and situations have been clarified. But again, what happens 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now? I think if you had asked me that in March, I don't know if I could hazard to guess we'd be where we are today. So I think as things change and evolve, we need to be able to adapt and respond accordingly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mikulik. I have Councillor Reimer next.
Thank you, Chair Njima. A question for Mr. Smith. The CAO in his earlier comments kind of alluded to a little bit along the lines of actual enforcement of this bylaw. The practical steps and how it plays out. I guess that would probably be my question to you, Dan, is how do you see this playing out? And a number of questions. If it's a regional bylaw or municipal bylaw, we are still on the we are still in charge of enforcing that in Lincoln, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. I would believe it would likely fall to us to enforce within our boundaries. As it relates to enforcement specific, I think the best option is a collaborative effort with the businesses and with the operation that's having to follow these guidelines. We'd be comfortable, going and speaking with them or helping them if they're in a situation where they have an individual or a group of individuals at their location that may not be following the rules, and the business owner wants to comply with them as much as they can, but having some trouble. We could see ourselves jumping in there and just going to have a conversation with them and educating them and letting them know why it's important and what the bylaw is and what the parameters on the bylaw are, and doing things like that. I think it's probably the best way to do this. And the more people we talk to and educate, that I think the better off we are, and the more we work with business operators and business owners just to be on the same page as them. I think having that consistent message will also make sure that everything's as good as it can be going forward. There'll be a little bit of a learning curve. Got a fly in front of my face. A little bit of a learning curve, but that's the best approach in my opinion. And should we have anything that escalates from there, then we would obviously be given some authorities through the bylaw, but hoping that we wouldn't have to go that direction.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, Dan, then if we as a municipality, let's say, passed a bylaw mandating the wearing of masks, how do you see that playing out, like as far as in a practical way, like calls to your office and addressing complaints, like just because of sort of the hot topic this has been? I can see it, and maybe I'm seeing it wrong, overwhelming your office. How do you see that moving forward? What's your view on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, it will be an influx of calls for sure, no question about it. I mean, every time that there's some change to what the emergency order state, or there's new bylaw in place or something like that, we see a little bit of an influx. But our staff are great, and they answer the questions as quickly as they can, and as educated as they are, they're able to resolve a lot of them just over the phone. A lot of times that we're going to a business just to have that conversation with them. So if it takes 5 minutes for us to go and have a quick chat with them, but through conversation over the phone and some in-person work, we're able to kind of, I mean, not to use a term that I guess everyone's been using, but flatten the curve on those as well. We're seeing some success there, and I think it would be very similar in this. It's a change that the residents and businesses would eventually get used to, and we'll see more compliance as we go, and the days that pass after a bylaw like this would be passed. But we'd manage it the best we could for sure, and I think it would be something we could manage.
Okay, yeah, I guess your last comment. Thank you for that. I wasn't questioning your the way you operate or the way your office works. That's for sure. I just was more concerned about how much this would keep you from doing other things. So thank you very much. That's it, Chairman Ruggiero.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. Councillor Pachariva is next.
Thank you, Chair Nshima. Question to, I guess, our Economic Development Officer, Mr. Deanny. So we've kind of weathered a storm of being closed for 3 months. And if mandatory masks can prevent a second wave and forcing a shutdown again that we're seeing in areas south of the border like Arizona and California and Texas and Florida, why wouldn't we do it? From an economic standpoint, to Mr. Deanny.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Madam Chair. So I completely agree, Councillor. Anecdotally speaking to a lot of our businesses and community, especially as we've handed out close to 1,700 face shields a lot of the businesses have been very thankful for the face shields and quite frankly, very thankful that they're still operating, that they got through phase one or the wave one and the shutdown, and are quite concerned about what's happening south of the border. And if we do have to go through a second wave and a second shutdown, they are quite concerned about, the viability of their business moving forward. And a lot of them are saying that, thanks to the face shields and some of the masks that their employees are wearing and customers are wearing, it's allowing people to come back into their businesses and generate some economic activity in our community. So, I mean, from my perspective, if a mandatory face mask helps us avoid a second wave, then we're all the better for it, because our businesses, quite frankly, cannot afford a second shutdown. So, I know there are some people and some businesses in our community that would be supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pachariva. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. And you know what? And I'm just gonna I'm gonna compliment Mr. Smith and his team, because we had an instance with one of the businesses uptown, Home Hardware, and Dan and his team worked hand in glove with them to educate them, to take what their head office had said needed to be done and work with them to overcome the hurdles that were in place. And they're thriving. So this can be done. And I would direct the same question to our CAO. If this can prevent a second wave and a cataclysmic economic downturn, why wouldn't we do it? Mr. CAO.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, I'd echo our EDO's comments and saying, I think supporting our businesses and helping them get through this is what we're here to do. I think Ms. Murray's comments, as well as Ms. Hicks, speak to the fact that some of our businesses are concerned on either side of this. But if there's anything we can do to both protect the health and well-being of our businesses, I think we would do it. If I could just, I think, briefly speak to the enforcement approach, and just piggybacked a little bit on what Dan said. And I know this is Dan's approach, but I think our initial enforcement, so that we don't get overwhelmed, would be focused on that education piece and otherwise be complaint-based. And so I think, like we've done with face masks, as Mr. Deaney highlighted, and other things, we would work with businesses, facility operators, prior to any bylaw coming into effect, to make sure information's there and available. But to answer your question, Councillor, I think anytime we can assist our businesses to thrive, we should look at any and all options to do so.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Thank you, Councillor Pachariva. I have Mayor Easton's hand up. Madam Mayor.
Madam Chair, I should have lowered my hand. I had answered a question for Councillor Mikulik.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions from anybody else at the moment, so I have one. First of all, I want to thank Regional Council for taking the issue on at that level and generating a report for consideration and debating something that none of the politicians would have likely thought they'd be debating in their careers or maybe even in their lifetime. I have a question related to the options as presented in the report. Option 3 was that the region conduct an education campaign continuing to recommend face coverings where appropriate physical distancing is not possible. I would say that option should go forward regardless of the status of the other two options and as soon as possible. And of course, the region would be the appropriate body to create and carry out such a campaign. My understanding is that the discussion during the debate did go down this road. In my opinion, the sooner this gets underway, the better. So my question is, was direction given at the regional level to begin this campaign, or is that question also going to be debated and a decision made on the 23rd?
Mayor Easton, you've muted yourself.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The region has already voted on the issue of education. The matter that we will be considering on the 23rd is mandating masks. Does that help you?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That answers my question. So I don't see any other hands up. So I'm going to read the motion. I have a motion that committee receive regional update regarding community safety and face coverings for information. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. And the mover for that motion is Councillor Bernay. Councillor Bernay, your vote?
Support.
Councillor McPherson?
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik?
Yay.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yay.
Councillor Reimer?
Yay.
Councillor Rinjma?
Yay.
Councillor Russell?
Yay.
Councillor Timmers?
Yay.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
And that motion is carried.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The next item on the agenda is item 6.4. It's the consent agenda. We are now considering the consent agenda, which includes PW 1020 Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan Milestones 2 update. Would any member of the committee like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? Councillor Russell, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to remove it to discuss. We need to have a vote.
Okay, Madam Clerk, is this, would we move this item to the end of the agenda, or what do you recommend?
No, we would consider it right now.
Okay. If you'd like to conduct the vote.
No, sorry. To confirm, Councillor Russell wanted to pull this item to discuss it, correct?
Correct.
Correct. So we're going to discuss it now. So Councillor Russell would have the floor.
Okay, Councillor Russell, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, is Ms. Fernandez available? I see her on, but I don't see, oh, here she is. Thank you, Ms. Fernandez. So this might be to see a very simple question. Thank you for the report. Again, it was very in-depth, very intuitive. My question was more along the lines of, it seems all very anecdotal. Again, my expectations maybe were a little bit higher as far as what some of the data was going to provide. And it seemed to be more from a residential experiential experience data, as opposed to what the actual science is showing as to what our climate change impacts are on Lincoln. And I was kind of hoping to see, at the very least, a little bit of both to show, okay, so the science is the science, and this is what's happened over to Lincoln, and this is maybe what the forecast could be of what we can expect, and then maybe make some rational decisions based on what those impacts are going to be, as opposed to how the residents perceive that climate change to be. And again, the analogy I kind of thought up was basically, if I gave everybody the same hot sauce and asked you how hot it is, everybody's going to have a variety of opinions on how hot that sauce actually is. But really, you go to a Scoville unit, is only as hot as it is. Like it's one set number based on science. So is there any kind of data that's going to come maybe in phase 3 to show what those impacts are going to be, as opposed to just being more anecdotal?
Absolutely. Through you, Madam Chair. The first milestone focused heavily on the actual data itself, so the climate projections and the projections for downscale to Lincoln as well. And so those were sourced from climatedata.ca, which is the federal database for climate projections and historic and future projections. And so that has informed the impacts that we, as the steering committee, the staff as the steering committee, have been analyzing and have been talking about. This report and the study that was sent out to households was intentionally a household survey to help understand the social vulnerabilities of climate change. For example, the science could say we can experience more extreme hot days, as an example, but if everybody in town had fantastic air conditioning, that's not necessarily a scientific projection that would be of major concern. And so this report conducted by, and the analysis of it conducted by Niagara Adapts was focusing very much on the social sustainability piece of the climate action response. The other part is that the questions weren't all open-ended. There were a number of questions, for example, scales or rates or agree or disagree. And so all of those were quantified and analyzed quantitatively as well, not just qualitatively.
Okay, so then going forward, is it possible to include the data in future reports as well, just so that when the decisions are being made, it's being made on either a variation of both? But again, I hate to think that somebody would read that report, say that we're making major municipal decisions based on experiential versions from our residents rather than actual science included.
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. Milestone 3 focuses on bringing those two pieces together. Talking to both the steering committee and presenting to them both the scientific projections as well as the social vulnerability of both our residents, as well as the town of Lincoln's vulnerabilities in terms of different departments. And so it will all be coming together in milestone 3 and will be part of the decision making forward when it comes to what climate action items the town would like to see, how do we prioritize those action items, and then how do we actually implement them. So a combination of all of these vulnerability, risk, and scientific projections is coming down the line.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Fernandez. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I have Councillor Brunet next.
Thank you, Chair Rinchima. I just wanted to reiterate on Councillor Russell's comments, because I couldn't agree more. And I think the data is going to be vital as we move forward. I mean, if you look at the shoreline protection that we've got with the lake levels of Lake Ontario and us having to go out for funding, you know, we're not talking about, you know, chump change here. We're talking millions of dollars. And we're talking about probably, I mean, Director Grant could speak to it, but a 10-year program to look at that. And I just think it's so important, because you look at the flash flood that we had late last week. We've already got a development in Lincoln that's we have residents that have been telling us for the last 3 years they're concerned about certain things, and now we've got a flash flood where in 15 minutes we've got some concerned residents. So I think the data is going to be vital as we move forward to make sure we share with that, so that everyone understands what our strategy is as we move forward on climate control. So I just wanted to reiterate that, to some real facts that are happening right now in Lincoln. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Brunet, do you have a question for Director Graham?
No question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brunet. Next, I have Councillor Mikulik.
Nope, sorry, I think that's Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Councillor Pachariva. My apologies.
No worries, Chair Rinchima. Thank you. Question to Ms. Fernandez through our CAO. Thanks for the report. And again, it's going to be down the same line as Councillor Russell and Councillor Brunet. So we've got 64% of our residents that say climatic change is impacting our community, but 24%, only 24% feel we're prepared. So wondering where we're going to start. Are we going to start seeing these impacts at this year's budget? And are they going to be identified as, you know, we're doing this to impact this climate change? Councillor Brunet had messaged, you know, mused about the flash flood. So like these are happening more and more frequently. So when we're doing an infrastructure upgrade, okay, well, we're going from, you know, an 8-inch pipe to a 10-inch pipe to address climatic change. So are we going to start seeing this going forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, the answer would be yes. Part of the action item planning, as I mentioned earlier, the inputs of it are both scientific as well as qualitative, but the outputs would be a very clear implementation schedule as well. And so with our steering committee and in partnership with, for example, the asset management plan and other initiatives that would relate to infrastructure, for example, the steering committee would be able to determine not only how to prioritize actions, but how to quantify them if they need to be immediate, if they are a 5-year project, a 10-year project. And so they are the ones, the steering committee will have the expertise in order to discuss and make assumptions and decisions moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. And a follow-up, if I may, Chair Inchma, to that.
Yes.
And I guess this is going to flow through to, and pardon the pun, through to the planning department and their report. So having the capability of saying, okay, rather than putting in an asphalt parking lot, you are going to use a permeable pavement. And like, is this actually going to give us some teeth to say, thou shall do this? And these are the repercussions if not. Or there are no repercussions because you're not going to get the permit. You're going to do this.
Through you, Madam Chair, the plan is corporate in scope, and so it would only include actions that the town can control with, for example, permits and things like that. It would be the planning department member on the steering committee who would be able to provide input on that. My role is to bring together and consolidate that expertise. When it comes to permits, for example, an action item in the plan that may come out could be investigating how to best implement a permit or implement a bylaw change or anything like that, as opposed to immediately saying thou shall do X, Y, Z. And
Okay.
so being the action items serve as a commitment to these actions, and they can range from implemented immediately to further discussion and investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patriva. Mr. CAO, did you have a comment?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think just to the councillor's point, I think it comes as no surprise based on our geography and where we find ourselves and some of the issues we've had in the past that we do have a certain vulnerability. And I know the report speaks to some of those vulnerabilities. And so I think as we look at the business case for a number of our infrastructure projects, making sure that we incorporate the long-term benefits and what may be a short-term investment to reap those long-term benefits, I think is important. And I use the burying of wires as I think a very basic, simple example that people can look to. That being said, this year is and will be a interesting year. It'll be a tough year. It'll be a challenging year. But I think as the report kind of alludes to, we continue to work closely with Brock. We continue to look at the Environmental Research and Sustainability Center that really formed the Brock Lincoln Living Lab. And I think they're starting to put out reports. They're starting to look at work in partnership with VRIC, which is right here in our backyard, on what and how cities and towns can add and look at accessible green space, can look at environmental features in a kind of post-coronavirus world. So I think you're going to see a lot more come out of that. Darby, who's one of the lead researchers at VRIC, Dr. Plummer, who's presented on a number of occasions, is going to continue to work with us. And so I think you're going to see more of that particular topic and study come out.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Next on the list, I have Councillor Mikulik to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair and Gemma. To Ms. Fernandez, I thought it was a pretty detailed report. I thought it was very informative. I'm not sure if, many municipalities do this sort of a report, or if it's typical of a municipality to do this sort of report. A specific area of concern that I had in reading it was that, we are doing this report, and on page 18, there's a stat there that 23% believe that local leaders are supporting effective climate change adaptation action. I would have thought that number might have been higher, given the fact that we are going through this exercise. And then below that, 18% have confidence in the preparedness of local leaders to address climate change impacts. We have a emergency management coordinator we are making the effort to address climate change and to take care of our residents. Is there any thought as to why you think those numbers are what they are and what we can do to boost them?
Through you, Madam Chair. That's a great question. And I think it does come down to public education and outreach. There have been a number of initiatives that I've conducted in the fall, as well as part of this survey, when just talking to residents and local business owners, for example. The topic of climate change does come up fairly quickly. I think that there is a little bit more. I know that Niagara DAPS and Brock University has also been doing a lot more when it comes to news articles and blogs and getting some of that information out there. I think when it speaks specifically to the role of municipal leaders, this plan is, the development of this plan and the emergency management plan, et cetera, are very much part of climate change. And I think climate change adaptation, and one of the areas moving forward would be to make those connections between all of the different departments and different sectors in which climate change can have an impact, and that will be discussed in the actual plan itself. The report, in the discussion of the report, it does, I believe, speak to a little bit of the future steps that the municipality, the town of Lincoln, will be taking or could be taking after this plan is complete. And so the development of, for example, a community plan that could speak more to how the community and residents are experiencing climate change, as opposed to this plan, which is corporate in scope, as well as the possibility of conducting a mitigation climate plan for the town of Lincoln and for residents as well. And so there are steps moving forward to increase those numbers, and we are taking efforts to engage citizens in a very meaningful way, given the current change in how we conduct community engagement with COVID.
Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate that response. I think one of the goals for myself as a councillor elected is to see those numbers go up. And, you know, I'd like to see more than 18% have confidence in us that we're looking out for them and, you know, taking climate change seriously. So that's the only point I was going to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mikulik. Mayor Easton, you had your hand up.
Mayor Easton, your mic is muted.
Still muted.
Yeah,
Still
you're
muted.
still muted.
It doesn't show that at this end. It keeps slipping back, I guess. Madam Chair, I'm looking at the issue of population health. I saw indications of that throughout this document. And I want to touch on some of the points where we are already making a difference. And so as Ms. Fernandez has taken us through this report, to you, Ms. Fernandez, could you speak briefly to knowledge and preparedness of staff to take on a project of this dimension? I mean, it's one thing to have this section in it that relates to the university and the researchers that are involved. But I take it that you are the person who's chairing the multidisciplinary committee at the local level. Can you speak to that and what that committee has contributed to the creation of this report?
Through you, Madam Chair, the Adaptation Steering Committee has contributed the indicator rankings. So the Niagara Adapt survey scored, each question was related to a specific indicator, and counselors in the climate workshop conducted in December, where you were asked to sort the different indicators from least important to most important. That exercise was also conducted with each member of the Adaptation Steering Committee. The Adaptation Steering Committee is also working on a document that connects the scientific climate projections with these vulnerabilities and with the risk assessments as well. And so they are scoring each of these vulnerability indicators and impacts accordingly as well. That is still currently being worked on and will be part of the next milestone update. But the Adaptation Steering Committee also contributed quite significantly to a municipal survey. So that was in partnership with the household survey that went out to the public. There was also a municipal survey that went through all of the areas and departments of Lincoln as well, that to understand its vulnerability and adaptive capacity to climate change.
Okay.
And all of that is inputted into the analysis that Niagara Adapts conducted on the back end of this plan, or of this report.
Great. Now, Madam Chair, my second question revolves around an item that several councillors brought up around the quantitative nature of both the information that goes into this study. And I'm interested, because I know that we have done so much, and I'm looking at it also through this lens of population health, issues around water supply, extreme heat and cold, extreme weather, heavy rainfall, lakefront stability. We're making changes in a number of areas, and we may not have got to the permeable pavement yet, but I certainly also had an interest in that. But to reach a 76% compliance on disconnecting downspouts, to get to a point where 16% of homes have rain barrels, to get to the point where there are 60% sump pumps. These are all milestones that we've reached. I think it's important for the public to know that. It's not just a list of projects. There's a huge amount of education and nurturing, and in some cases, hand-holding that has to go on. I mean that in the most positive sense. And so at what point, and is it the role of this committee, to begin to identify for council what the costs are going to be to achieve this, keeping in mind that we will be judged harshly, if we have no plan, and we certainly have identified local readiness, which I applaud you in starting in that direction. But there are going to be ongoing costs here. This is not a one-trick pony, as they say. So can you help us understand that?
Absolutely, through you, Madam Chair. The action plan itself will be quite detailed. As I mentioned, it will include action items that are fleshed out when it comes to priority and when we want to implement it, if it's a long-term project, what further actions are required to take, the budgets, the estimated budgets and staff resources and time that would be required to implement that. That specific action item appropriately. Other municipalities have, when conducting their climate adaptation plan, have also followed a very detailed approach. And so that seems to be one of the industry standards when it comes to, or best practices rather, when it comes to implementation schedules. I will also add that Niagara Adapts, as part of their workshops, will be providing a lot of resources and how to most successfully set up the town of Lincoln to implement the action items, and making sure that the departments and staff are ready for it and fully equipped with the tools to make the best decisions moving forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Madam Chair, I would also like to add that I want to go back to the issue of knowledge and preparedness of staff, because, unless we're going to move into a phase where we're going to start contracting out all kinds of important work like this, which is so which has to be developed not in silos, but in very much a convergence model of people with professional backgrounds. These are all things that we have to keep we have to keep in our minds when we are looking at the integrity of such a report when it's complete. And I'm sure there will be many different phases. I want to thank you very much for the report. And I think you've placed us in local readiness. I think you've put us in a very, very good position in terms of your assessment of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have Councillor Russell. Councillor Russell next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick follow-up. It just goes to the data. I had this on my original list of things to bring up in my first point, but I missed it. On page 19, and I think this might be a typo, but I'm just not sure, so I have to ask. It says under the demographics of those people that were surveyed that 6% of the residents are 5 years of age or younger, which would equate to about 65 kids filled out the survey, 5 years of age or younger. So any clarification on that? Maybe it's they have children under 5 years of age or younger?
Pardon me, through you, Madam Chair, I believe that should be, I can clarify that with Niagara DAFs as they present and get back to you if that is a typo.
Yeah, again, just because it has a baby on it kind of threw me off a little bit. So I didn't know which way that was going to end up. So
it might, through you, Madam Chair, it might refer to residents because it was a household survey. It included all of the different household members or family members. And so that might be part of it, but I will clarify.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I don't see anybody else with questions, so there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva that we receive for information report PW 1020 Corporate Climate Adaptation Plan Milestone 2 update. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Please unmute your mic as I call out your name. Councillor Bernay.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yay.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Rinjava.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. We have now concluded the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Chair McPherson to assume the chair at this time for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair Regina. We are now at agenda item 7.1, delegations. We have no registered delegations this evening for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We move to item 7.2, consent agenda. We are now considering the consent agenda, which includes PD 15-20, status of active residential development. Would any member like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? I guess seeing none, I would. There are a couple of items within this this report that I thought would be timely for basically some updates. And I am particularly interested in item number 19 under the draft approval plans. Prudence, can we get an update from the CAO
and or the Director of Planning. I'd like to hear what is happening with the developers now, and when can we expect to see a detailed design of the development, and do we know when servicing will start?
Through you, or to you, Chair. Why don't I start, and then there's definitely a few members of the senior leadership team that can chime in. Director Graham specifically on maybe the servicing timeline. I know we've provided members of council an update on that. And then Mr. Bruder and Ms. Dale on the various elements of the particular project. And so why don't I turn it over to those individuals first, and if there's anything that I need or can add, I can definitely do that. Other than Councillor, I'll start by saying simply that we continue to be in dialogue with the developer and their respective business partners on moving this particular matter forward. Mr. Bruder and I have met with them on a number of occasions. I think COVID has slowed down a little bit of some of their consultants' work that needs to happen. But I'm going to let Director Graham speak a little bit to the MTO work that is going on and when servicing is expected to start. And then Matt and Kathleen can chime in on the planning items.
Through you, Madam Chair, in response to Mr. Kopp, question, sorry about that, excuse me. Regards to the Prudence water main servicing, we are currently making some good progress with the MTO. I think starting this week, you'll notice there'll be a geotechnical works happening out there, a drill rig doing boreholes. So we're working with our MTO colleagues to get more information as part of their permit approval. So we're going to be doing that over the next 2 months. And once we go through that process, then we will be in a position to look at tendering the project. So that's an update as it's related to the water main servicing for the Prudence project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Graham. Through to Ms. Dale or Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why don't I start? Yeah, just with respect to where we are now, Mike is correct in terms of, some of the effects of COVID, not just on some of the consulting work, but just in general with developers and how they're approaching their pro formas, how they're approaching their business plans. I know the majority landowner has been looking at working with other developers. There's been some questions because some of these other developers weren't involved in the draft plan stage. So there's a little bit of back and forth there, some inquiries about that. We've also had some inquiries about development opportunity, just in general, just on that site in terms of, what are we looking at in terms of design? Is there flexibility on certain parts of the plan? And really, we haven't really received anything at this point. I mean, there's some flexibility in other things, but we've heard loud and clear that we want a high quality built form there. We meticulously, as you know, went through the secondary plan and the draft plan to ensure that we want to continue to do so. But at this time, it's been more just conversations about how we're going to work under kind of a little bit of a new framework under new market conditions and some partnership opportunities that the majority landholder is exploring.
Okay, is there any other comments from staff?
Kathleen?
Okay, so yeah, I think it's important to hear where we're at with the project. There was obviously a lot of work went in to get us through all of the approval process, and I know there's some challenges that we're facing, obviously with COVID, and that would certainly set things back, a number of months. I guess I'm really looking for, some feel or some indication that things are moving ahead, that things are, not necessarily on schedule, but that we should expect to see from the developer, in the coming months, coming back to us with some kind of plan or where we at. Right now, I'm hearing that, it's really sort of up in the air as to where we're at. There's negotiations going on with various other developers or builders, and really no dates, in the near future as to when we think things would start to materialize, whether that be a detailed design or whether that be servicing or any of those types of things. So maybe back to you, Mr. CAO, if there's any further comments.
So I see Kathleen has her mic off. I don't know if she has something to add, and then I can speak to just some of the conversations I've had.
I don't have any further comments on this particular item.
Councillor, I'm still confident that this project's moving forward and will continue to move forward and meet the appropriate milestones. I think Director Graham highlighted some of the servicing challenges, and I say challenges in so much as I think both the region and ourselves weren't aware of the MTO's involvement on that particular piece of land, and so I think it's taken a little bit longer. There's a little bit more work on the front end that we're having to do, so we do anticipate on tendering that project, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, sometime in September, so that work can get going. I think that's probably an appropriate timeline. I've got every indication from the FBH group that they remain committed to moving forward. This is a 10-year project. And so I believe I think when you look at a project of this scale and this duration, they want to make sure that whatever partners they do have in place are the appropriate partners, and I think can be partners with them as they move forward. There are some ownership of the ESSO lands that are included in there that are under different ownership right now. So I think it's working with individuals like that to make sure that whatever built form we have in that area is one that meets the town's obligations. So I suspect as we get to the other side of the summer, I think you're going to hear more conversations around detailed design. I think you're going to hear more information pertaining to that, and I suspect things will begin to ramp up. We're finalizing things around park. We're finalizing things around what do widths of roads look like, all those things that we talked about. And I think the work that Brock and Virik are doing specifically around some of the green infrastructure that we wanted to see in this particular location are also going to be inputs into that. So I still remain very confident, Chair McPherson, that we're going to see something in the foreseeable future.
Mr. Bruder, do you have further comments? I see your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just that, I wanted to add to that. Yeah, in talking, Mike's exactly right with his comments for the overall subdivision, but there is opportunities too, as there always have been, really, for flexibility in terms of starting certain parts at different times than initially were anticipated. I know there's been some conversations with FBH about that too. They might want to proceed faster on certain blocks than others. Perhaps even maybe where the subway is located or things like that. So, we can move things around. I know they're interested and they're having their consultant look at some of these things. So, they are moving forward on their end from all accounts. It's just, I think there is still a little bit of back and forth required on their end too, with respect to some of these partnership talks and whatnot.
Okay, and I have Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Through you to our CAO, these are some new developments that I'm hearing now. Given the COVID situation and the timing of all of this and possible delays, are we going to be is there a risk that we're prematurely servicing this land? It seems like the plan is changing somewhat.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Councillor, you'll have to help me understand what you mean by new revelations. I think if you mean that the delay with MTO has probably set us back a little longer than we want. I would suggest maybe half a year so that the servicing will begin this year and go well into next year. I think that positions us well in terms of the timelines.
Yeah.
I think there's always a toing and froing, I would suggest, as it relates to development and development interests and partnerships when you look at a project of this scale. So I think that was always on the radar. Did we know what that would look like in particular? And has COVID slowed it down slightly? Yes. Did we know what it would look like? No. But I'd be cautious to characterize it as something new that's kind of popped out, and are we premature? I think as a result of unforeseen circumstances and the delay that is coming with the servicing, I think now we're probably in the right time frame, because we probably added 6 months to that timeline just by virtue of the MTO approval process. And Director Graham corrected me. MTO approvals will come in September. We're probably looking at tendering a little later in the fall. So again, I think those timelines are probably the appropriate timelines to correspond with just the delay in getting a detailed conversation happening with the developer. As for the ESSO lands, they've always been in separate holdings, initially with the province, and now in the holdings of a private individual. And so that was always one of those things that the FBH group was looking at purchasing, and is probably still very much on the table.
And I appreciate your clarification. I did not know that there was partnerships being formed. I didn't know if anything was formal. I didn't know if there's contingent on forming partnerships. I don't know, I'm just trying to get clarification as to how this project is moving and who's the lead on it from a developer perspective. That's the clarification I'm seeking. And, I want to make sure that this development moves forward in as soon as possible and as quickly as possible. I just want to make sure that, it will happen, that the proponents are moving forward with or without partnerships.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just to add a little bit more to the councillor's comments, and Kathleen just reminded me how in the past, servicing is always what's holding up development. So it's good to have services in place. But I would also add that I think anytime you look at development of any sort, there's partnerships are always there. There are people who own land and are land developers or land holders, and then there are people that build houses. Sometimes bringing those teams together in whatever sort of partnership or format is how development happens. And so at the end of the day, those are some of the conversations that I think they're having. This is a marriage between a landholder that has a substantial piece of land and will likely be developing that land for anywhere between half a decade to a decade. And so I think making sure all those I's are dotted, T's are crossed on their side is important. And on our side, we need to continue to work and look at how making that development feasible and what we want it to be is also a critical part of that. So there are things that we will be bringing back to council around community improvement plans, around some green infrastructure, and some other things that Kathleen and her team are working on.
Thank you for that. And if I may, one more question. We service the lands. We do what we intend to do. This question may go to perhaps Kathleen Dale. Will that increase the value of the land, and will that bring us more tax revenue from an MPAC reassessment perspective? Or should it?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. It might increase the assessment, but basically what, from my understanding, is what MPAC will look at is when land is vacant and it's not zoned properly, it has one value. When you get draft approval, the value goes up a bit. And then when the actual land when there are services, not external, but internal to the development, when those are installed, that may increase it a little bit because then you have like vacant lots and blocks. And then the next stage of when the assessment goes up is when you actually build a building and the building gets occupancy. So it's more the internal servicing of the site that will likely increase the value versus the external servicing.
Okay, thank you for that. I just, I personally feel that the value of the land would be increased with this additional servicing. However, I'm not a land planning expert. I leave that to yourself and our CAO. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I think we had Mary Easton next. Did we, Trish?
I did, and then she lowered her hand and now she raised it again. So now we have Councillor Mikulik first and then Mayor Easton.
Okay. Mayor Easton?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, as you know, you and I have had a number of discussions on how the Prudence project is percolating along. And in turn, I've had those same discussions with the CAO, as I'm sure you have. And I just want to bring everyone up to date who happens to be watching this, is that a number of years ago when we decided that we were going to enter into another dimension, a totally different dimension when it came to the secondary plan, that we were not contemplating some kind of mundane development on the Prudence property. And so we're at a point now, of course, we're very interested in going ahead. And I've asked the question a number of times because I am concerned at this point when it becomes an issue of who are the builders going to be. As Councillor Mikulik says, who's the lead on the project? Who are these new people that may be coming on board, and what do they understand about those core expectations, those principles and expectations that we started out with? And they cannot be put aside now because we are moving into another phase. In fact, I believe that they are even more important than ever. And when I hear people coming forward during this stage of the design and they want to bring compromises to the situation, I get very nervous because that is not what we were looking for. The compromises in terms of this property and what it's going to look like and those expectations were all sorted out in great detail with the community at the secondary plan level. So I want to make sure that anybody that comes into this project understands that the council in Lincoln is not going to be asleep on the sidelines waiting for the information to come forward, almost ready, signed, sealed, and delivered. And I've had this conversation with the principal at FBH, and he has assured me that he is the lead. And so I accepted that from him, and I'm holding him to that. And he, for all the experiences that we have had with him, he has behaved in an honorable fashion. And so I'm expecting that in the future. Relationships on this other piece of property and the compatibilities of design work that may be done on signature buildings is key. Very, very key now that we are able to negotiate. So I know that staff understand. You heard Mr. Bruder. He's been hearing from both of us and others. I know that staff will represent our needs very well, but I think it's important for the public to know, the people in Victoria Shores and elsewhere, that we are on this and we're going to remain on it. And so when the compromises start coming down the road, I'm going to be looking at them with a very jaded eye because I believe that we did our homework along with the property owner developers and that those principles and expectations still stand. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. And we have Councillor Bernay.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I wasn't going to speak on this PD 15-20, but it seems like we've had some commentary. So I'm going to take this opportunity just to make a comment. We had the opportunity last week, Councillor Reimer, Councillor Timmers, Michalak, myself, along with Leanne and Paul Deanny, to go to the groundbreaking ceremony over on Ontario Street for the Lincoln Flooring mixed use. And we have heard for a number of years from residents who consider the Ontario Street, you know, kind of a gateway into Beamsville. I'm not going to say a gateway to Lincoln because that would be inaccurate, but a gateway into Beamsville. And especially if the GO train is going to come to Lincoln, we want Ontario Street to be revitalized and look a lot better than it currently looks. I think the sign bylaw will go a long way to meeting that, but I just want to make a comment to our planning staff and our directors and our associate director that we heard nothing but kudos from the owners, as well as the developer, who's a developer, Lanka Contracting from Brantford, who deals in southwestern Ontario. And I know that for a fact because they dealt with them for 30 years, that they had nothing but good things to say, very positive things about the way they've been greeted in Lincoln and how the applications have flown. So I just wanted to make a comment that I really think that that's a great step forward to what Ontario Street is going to look like with 32 new apartments. So that's my comment. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if someone could give us an update on two reports or two of the projects that have been in the queue for quite some time. The first one, and I'm not going to name names, the first one is the report for project number 33, and that is a 6th apartment unit on the corner of Ontario and May, if we could get an update on that, as well as project number 38, which is 24 apartments over on Queen Street.
Mr. Bruder or Ms. Dale?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can give an update on the one on Ontario and May. That one was going through site plan approval, was going through it for quite some time. Just it was more on the applicant side, just figuring out what they wanted to do with some of the design, because this one has a, you know, it fronts onto 2 streets. It's a pretty prominent location. So we were asking for, you know, some good aesthetic treatments on both sides, just because there was high visibility there. We got to the point where the design was agreed upon. Everything's good. It's just a matter now of the site plan agreement being sent back to us. It's been provided to them for comment, but it's been quite some time. I followed up on numerous occasions, and due to follow up again, I haven't heard much, but unfortunately with that one, the ball is in the applicant's court at the moment, but we are at the point where we're good with the design, we're good with everything. It's just a matter of taking care of all the legal things, agreement and registration and all of those things.
Okay, and Queen Street?
You're talking about the one as well that was a, I forget the address, but it was at one point proposed to be kind of a mixed use building as well. That one there, there's been a lot of dialogue back and forth with the property owner. They were constantly revising their design over and over again, starting from square one in some occasions. And when they did make site plan submissions, they were not complete. We were missing some key studies and things of that type. So we were going back and forth with them. Just recently, as I understand it, I think the property's been put up for sale. I didn't know that until relatively recently, but that's another one too that we just haven't heard anything further from the applicant, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to get an update on those. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. I had one other item, and that's item number 31, under the site-specific developments, and that is the King Street, Beamsville, Ontario Street development. And we had a lengthy discussion about this development a couple of months ago, and I don't want to rehash that particular discussion, but I'm just looking for an update and a potential start date to construction.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So since the last meeting that we had back in May regarding some other applications for this property, he now has site plan approval. The agreements relating to his application for community improvement plans were recently forwarded to him for signing, so we should have those back shortly. he is aware of the time limit on when he has to start construction, and that is September the 1st. So he will have to start construction by that date, and he's agreeable to that. So at this point, it's just a matter of finalizing some paperwork so he can get his foundation permit.
Very good. Very good. That's good news. Okay, I see no other hands up, so we will move to a motion. Moved by Councilor Regima to receive and file report PD 1520, status of active residential developments for information. And I ask Trish to take the vote, please.
Of course, please turn on your mic as I call out your name. Councilor Brunei.
Yay.
Councilor McPherson.
Yay.
Councilor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councilor Pachariva.
Yay.
Councilor Reimer.
Yay.
Councilor Rinchma.
Yay.
Councilor Russell.
Yay.
Councilor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that is carried.
Great. Okay, so we now move to item 7.3, reports on our agenda. We now consider item 7.3. First report is PD-11-20, draft public nuisance bylaw. Do members of council have any questions or comments? Okay, Councilor Mikulik.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Through you, I just wanted to thank Dan Smith for working on this, and probably Matt Bruder as well, and Kathleen Dale, perhaps. I'm not sure who was involved, but I like it. I think it's a long time coming, and it'll be work enforcing it, right? Because everyone's going to always challenge anything that you propose. But I think that there's been a lot of residents in our end of the town that have been hoping for something like this to come along to hopefully address, some of the odors, some of the, the lighting and that sort of thing that's been part of that cannabis industry. And I think I'm pleased with what I've seen, and I just want to thank you for bringing this forward and in a timely fashion as well. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith, any comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I nothing further to add to that. It's going to be a work in progress to see where this goes, but we feel strongly that we have something that we can use going forward.
Yes, I would also like to echo Councilor Mikulik's comments and just the speed with which this came forward. I think we got wind of the Hamilton nuisance bylaw that is referenced in the report in the spring, and you and your department, and I'm sure Matt put this together fairly quickly. And I know we're just at the front end of this. We still certainly have a public process that we need to go through, but I would also say this is very, very thorough. Almost feels like that magic pill, if you will, that we needed to have some kind of control over what was going on in our community. So absolutely kudos to you and your team for putting it together. I thought this would be an appropriate time to make a comment with regard to Dan, and everybody knows that Dan wraps up his time with the town of Lincoln this coming Friday. It's always great to see, one of ours move on to a position of greater responsibility. I believe it says so much about the person and the organization. I know we can speak, that I can speak for council in saying we are so happy for you, Dan. Not to say we won't miss you and the many contributions you've made to take our bylaw enforcement to a new level of professionalism and respectability in Lincoln and really right across Niagara region. Your steady hand, your diplomatic way has gained us all, and that would be town staff and council, so much credibility amongst our residents and businesses. From simply things such as introducing uniforms to your team, to teaching us all that bylaw enforcement is more about education and compliance than it is about enforcement. You and your team have brought us to a very good place over the relatively short time you've been with us. So the very best to you, Dan, in your next challenge. The city of Cambridge is very lucky to get you.
I'll comment quickly on that. I just want to thank you very much for the kind words. Appreciate all the help I've got along the way, and I've got a lot of help and a lot of support. So I appreciate everything you just said, and I hope what I've been able to do here with the team is something that will be able to be moved forward and continue to improve. So thank you to everybody, and I look forward to hopefully staying in contact with many of you, and good luck going forward.
Well, hopefully we can, and I know Mr. CEO wants to make a comment, but hopefully we can get together to share a patio beverage before you take off. I know the time is short, but maybe we can squeeze something in. So over to you, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, as I said in my announcement a few weeks ago when I shared that Dan was leaving, these are the emails I hate to write. These are the emails I kind of hate to communicate to members of council. But I think I'd echo your comments in saying that in the approximately 2 years Dan's been with us, which really is a short time, he has accomplished a lot, and he's really turned around a bylaw function and built a strong, respectable, and very responsive service. Dan was one of those and is one of those individuals, and his CAO and his team and his director and commissioner, general manager, whatever they call them in Cambridge, are going to be lucky to have them. He was always responsive to those crazy and wild emails the CAO would send him on the weekends and in the evenings, asking him to do things or follow up on things. And I know for me, I'm going to personally miss Dan, not just because he came from Hamilton, but because he is everything and remains everything one would want in a public servant. And again, I said that in my announcement. I said that to Dan personally. Just so council knows, I did try to do everything possible to keep him here, as I know both Kathleen and Matt did. But Dan is moving to be closer to his children, and I think for a number of us, we can completely understand why. And I know on behalf of the senior management team, and I think all of his colleagues across the organization, we wish him nothing but the best, and we'll miss everything he brought to the role.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Moving along, so there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer that we receive and file report PD-1120 draft public nuisance bylaw for information and direct planning and development staff to obtain public input to allow for comments to be received related to the draft public nuisance bylaw attached as Appendix A. I will now ask Trish to call the vote.
Thank you. Please unmute your mic. Councillor Brunei.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yay.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Hinchma.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
We will now consider item 7.4, report PD-12-20, proposed heritage designation, Grand White Oak Tree, 4600 Victoria Avenue. Do members of council have any questions or comments? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. I'm just very excited to see this come tonight, and with the designation of this tree, should that be council's decision, will be the first tree in Lincoln that we've designated. And the history on this property and this tree is just very significant within our town. The tree being 300 years old. And it is just absolutely gorgeous. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. And the owner himself is quite supportive of designating this tree. He feels that it would be very beneficial to his property, similar to the, I slipped my mind now what I was, the comfort maple. So I'm just really excited to see this come forward tonight. So I hope everybody enjoyed reading the report. And I want to thank Monica Coquiera for her work on this. Thank you, Chair McPherson.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, very exciting. So Trish, who was next? I didn't watch.
Next is Mayor Easton.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And this was put forward to the committee about a year ago. And I always like to go to that page in these applications that is actually on page 41, which is the designation by municipal bylaw, which represents an entire cadre of policy that we developed here at the town under Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I am very, very pleased that this tree, if it's council's wish, that it will be protected and that we won't have any incidences of, oh gee, we didn't know and it's gone. So I'm very pleased to see this, and I look forward for the black maples to be included in the next application. Thank you very much to the committee. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. So I want to echo Councillor Timmer's comments as a member on the Heritage Committee. We did bring this motion forward, but I don't recall until reading the report where the town arborist has mentioned that he advised that a surveyor would be required to determine the ownership of the tree as it appears to sit on or close to the property line. So I'm just wondering, through you, Mr. Chair, if maybe Kathleen could comment on that. Like, is that something that we need to do before moving forward? Like, it's great that the current owner, but if we've got someone saying that this possibly is sitting on or close to the property line, is this something that should be addressed before we move forward? I only asked the question because I'm reading this for the first time in the report.
Director Dale.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, I mean, it is quite possible that the tree might actually sit partly on the road allowance and partly on the applicant's property. So what the arborist had recommended is just some further information to determine, you know, whether it's all on one property or all on another property. That's something that staff can look at as part of the evaluation process. If it ends up being on, say, both properties are road allowance and the property that's proposed to be designated, then it would basically become what I would say would be a joint responsibility for maintenance.
Councillor, is that good?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. I just like I say, maybe Councillor Timmers remembers something different at committee, but I don't recall hearing that information. So it was just something that was new that had come to my attention. So I just wanted to make sure we don't move forward and then find out we should have put a stop sign up. But that's good for now. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Timmers, you have another comment?
Thank you, Chair McPherson. Just to follow up on Councillor Bernet's comments, that is correct, Councillor Bernet. I don't remember that ever being discussed at committee. And now that you have brought it to my attention, I did look at the map and it you know, I wondered if it was sitting on the line, but I'm satisfied with staff's comments moving forward. But thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Bernet.
Okay, so seeing.
Oh, we have one more.
Councillor Mikulik, pardon me.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Just a thought that I had during this discussion with regard, like, it's a beautiful tree and it's an extremely old tree. and we do have tree bylaws and we do have rules in place. Should we be considering fines? What is the penalty should some harm come to this tree? How can we protect this tree from any ill fate that may or may not, happen? You never know if there'd be a severe enough fine. What is the fine in this case, or what could we make it to further strengthen the livelihood of this tree? Is that something we want to consider?
I'm not sure that we are finished with our tree bylaw. I think that is still in process. So I don't know, Mr. Bruder, if you have any further comments.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just that, yeah, you're exactly right. We're still working through that, but those are good questions, Councillor Mikulik, and we're looking to finalize that in the next little while, our tree policy and bylaw. So moving forward, those are definitely things that we want to make sure we incorporate into that 100%.
And thank you for that. It's just a question I have. I don't know if we have any trees that are designated. So it's something that we want to consider with our tree bylaw. And should anything happen, we want to penalize these people to the maximum extent possible to discourage any ill fate. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. I see no further comments, so we have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet to receive report PD-12-20 regarding the application for heritage designation of the grand white oak tree located on the southwest corner of Victoria Avenue and Green Lane in Vineland for information and to direct planning and development staff to proceed with the designation process for the grand white oak tree as outlined in section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I now ask Trish to call out the vote.
Please unmute your mic as I call out your name. Councillor Brunet.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Patriva.
Yes.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Injima.
Yes.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yes.
Mayor Easton. Mayor Easton?
Yes.
And that motion is carried.
We will now consider item 7.5, report PD-13-20, proposed amendment 1 to the growth plan 2019. Do members of council have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariba to receive report PD-13-20 on the proposed amendment 1 to the provincial A Place to Grow growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and to direct staff to forward comment and advice to the region for submission to the province, and direct staff to forward a copy of this report to the Niagara region. Trish, would you call out the vote, please?
Thank you. Please unmute your mic as I call out your name. Councillor Brunet.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yay.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Injima.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
We will now consider item 7.6, report PD-14-20 Heritage Committee review. Do members of council have any questions or comments? Well, I do, and I would really like to see us pursue additional citizens to the committee prior to making our councilors voters on any motions or any decisions within that within that committee. And, you know, I think that's in our best interests. I think we need to be careful in our counselors becoming the decision makers. And it sounds like that's at real risk with the number of people that are coming to these meetings and the numbers that we need for quorum being, I believe, 3. So if we had 1 citizen and 2 counselors at the meeting, we've got quorum. And I think that we've got to really try to pursue having citizens making the recommendations for heritage, as they are for active transportation, as they are for age-friendly. So I think that we've got work to do here before we are looking at a motion to just go ahead and appoint voters being our counselors on this committee. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. In regard to making the counselors voting members, I think it's a good move and it's important. In the very beginning, finding people who wanted to join the committee was not overly easy. There was not a lot of applications. We have a very slim committee. We've had trouble reaching quorum. We have members perhaps that don't have any prior experience. I just feel, and it's also, we have to remember that the Municipal Heritage Committee is mandated. It's a completely different type of committee, and the municipality is mandated that we have a Heritage Municipal Committee. I would leave it over to maybe perhaps Kathleen Dale, if you could add some comments regarding, or I'm not sure who wants to speak to it, regarding the legalities around this type of committee within the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to add to the councillor's comments, currently there are 5 citizen members and 2 council members. We have had 1 member that has resigned. This is very much a legislated committee in that this committee's purpose is to review all of the various heritage matters and provide recommendation to council for council to implement those decisions. As Councillor Timmers has mentioned, there has been some difficulty getting quorum at the meetings, and it has been difficult finding members. The other thing to keep in mind too is from a staff point of view, we think that having some council members also as voting members and also adding 1 additional member will help move things along. There are a lot of heritage matters that need to get reviewed by the Heritage Committee as they relate to development. There could be heritage impact assessments, for example, that come as part of an application, and we do need the committee members to look at that as well. We also have community improvement plan grants, so people make applications for improvements on properties that are here, have a heritage designation. So we also need those to move forward. And by having meetings canceled here and there, it makes it very, very hard for those types of things to move forward, but also for the work plan that the Heritage Committee has set for themselves. One of the big tasks is meeting, and we've got a draft list of properties, but I know the Heritage Committee would like to move a lot of those properties forward so that we can start getting more of those properties designated. And as well, one of the things that Monica did is she also looked at some of the Heritage Committees from some of the other municipalities, and it's not unusual to have some of the council members as voting members. So, these are the reasons why staff are putting this report forward.
Is that good, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Mary Easton, I think you were next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just want to speak briefly to quickly to the legislative prescription that this committee operates under. There is a fair bit of independence that has been implied in the Act. And you will recall that in the last term, there were significant changes made to the entire policy structure, which was approved by Councillor. And I look back at the evolution of other committees that have provincial acts that direct them, such as the Library Act, and the way it functions. Heritage committees and other committees often have growing pains because of the heavy relationship to the planning matters and the compliance to those matters. I believe that the knowledge and skill, but more than just influence, is very, very important for the committee members. Relationships with the community are extremely important in terms of encouraging people to come on the committee, and that can only be achieved through modeling. So I can support this, this recommendation based on those matters. Thank you very much.
Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to, I see Julie Kirkelos there. I remember when we were selecting these committees, we had quite a bit of interest, and we actually had interviews in the selection process. Did we not have many come out for this committee? And if we did, or if we didn't, do we not have a you know, a associate player, like a, you know, candidates in waiting, or members in waiting, like a backup list? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kirklos, if you are with us.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. Through you to the councillor. We actually, the other committees had a lot more applications that were received. Us, not necessarily for the heritage committee.
We lost you a little bit there, Julie.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So we received a lot more applications for the other citizen advisory committees. The Heritage Committee itself, we did not receive an abundance of applications. And so, you know, we are where we are at the moment. One has resigned, and there has been some interest from the community to say that should there be a vacancy, they would be interested in applying again. And that is one of the reasons why we've put that in the recommendation tonight.
Okay. So just to clarify, we didn't have any members, applicants that were not necessarily chosen. We don't have many of those out there.
No.
Okay. No. And then if I may, Mr. Chair, one more question. By having council members on this committee, is there a risk of conflict of interest with regards to decisions that this committee makes regarding developments or regarding designations within? It's probably a question to go to Kathleen Dale. Some of these designations or some of these decisions may have an impact on decisions that council may have to make. Is there any risk of conflict of interest with that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't think this would be any different than whether it's council or a committee of council. If there's a council member that feels that they have a conflict on a particular item that is being discussed at the Heritage Committee, they can also declare an interest on that at the Heritage Committee. And when something comes before committee, they can also declare a conflict at that time. So, I mean, the rules of conflict of interest would apply. And I know Julie can probably add any additional comments if necessary.
Sure. The only comment I would add, thank you, Kathleen, to the through to the chair, to the councillor, sorry, is decisions are always made at council. So although that there is a statutory requirement for this committee, they still make recommendations. However, council makes decisions. So whatever is being recommended or advised from this committee, regardless if it has council members on this committee, the decisions are made at council that are final. So that's the one thing that I would add. And in regards to the declarations of interest, it is in the code of conduct for all the citizen advisory committees, whether you are a councillor or a citizen, and that when they do come to council, you would still have to declare that conflict.
Okay, I just want a clarification on that. Thank you for that response. Just because when you're on a committee, you are voting on a recommendation, and that recommendation is being used as information to form a council decision. So I just want a clarification on that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair McPherson. So I'm not good as a member of the Heritage Committee. I'm not going to speak to, you know, whether we should be voting members or not. I'm not going to go down that road, but I can just tell you that, you know, if this committee is going to be successful under the current structure, you know, we're really paddling upstream without too many oars right now. So we need to do something. And I know that Julie and the clerk's department will do everything to try to, you know, engage some new members. But, you know, I took it upon to Google some things in preparation for this meeting. And I mean, in a perfect world, this all makes great sense. But, you know, if you go to the municipal heritage through the province, it says that although the Ontario Heritage Act requires a minimum of 5 members, and we did have 5, and one, as it's been alluded to, resigned, so we're down to 4 plus 2 council members. Most communities find that 7 to 11 members better represent their communities. Ideally, a heritage committee should include people representative of the community that represent a balanced cross-section of local interest and perspectives. So, you know, I really hope that we can be very, diligent in our search to add some to members so that, you know, this committee can be more fruitful, because there is a lot of work. Councillor Timmers can speak to it a lot better than I can. She was on the committee all of last term of the work that's in the queue that we want to do. And right now we're kind of spinning our wheels. So I'm just going to speak to that for what it's worth, that we do need to make some changes. If it comes in recruitment, that's great. That's I think everyone will look for that. And I also had a conversation with the clerk and the CAO earlier this afternoon that we do have a committee member that is very knowledgeable, but due to where she works, getting back to the meetings has been somewhat problematic. So, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to change a time of when the meeting starts to make sure that that representative can be available. So I just think we need to look at a number of options as we move forward with this Heritage Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pachariva.
Thanks, Chair McPherson. And this kind of came out of the Library Super Conference. Maybe we've got to review the way that we seek citizens to sit on these committees. So, and I think long gone are the days of just, you know, posting things on social media or posting advertisements in the newspaper. You need to search out those interest groups that you know have an expression or a feel for this type of committee work or any other committee work. So, you know, whether it's going to the archives or the historical museums or some place like that, because evidently what we're doing right now isn't working. We've had a few people express interest in both talking to Councillor Brunet and Councillor Timmers today on this subject. Just curious why it's taken so long. You know, the one fella left after the first meeting. Like, why haven't we pulled the trigger on this sooner? Because when you get in this crunch and you know the numbers are less, quorum is tough.
Is there a response to that, Ms. Dale? Or whoever's going to take that?
Through to the counselor through the chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to add to that. So with the low response rate that we had during the recruitment phase, and it was a new year starting with these committees, it just wasn't possible at the time to go back out for recruitment at that time. But given that it's been a little while, we wanted to see how the committee functioned, and we wanted to see how those meetings would carry forward. So now that we have been at it for almost a year, or over a year rather, it's now time that we amend. So that's why this is before you.
Is that good, Counselor?
Yeah, I guess.
What are you looking for?
Okay, so Counselor Timmers, this is your second, correct?
Yes.
Second
Yeah.
time speaking. Go ahead.
I believe so. Thank you, Chair McPherson. Just to follow up to Councillor Pachariva, I agree. Maybe we do need to look in different areas because the Heritage Committee is very specific. We're looking for very specific skills and interests. And perhaps there aren't as many people out there that have that interest. We see our age-friendly committee is huge. We have, it's a fantastic set of skill set around the table. Heritage is very specific, and perhaps we do need to broaden where we're looking. I'm all for adding more members as if we can find people that want to participate. There is a lot of heavy lifting to do, and there is a lot of work that requires specific skills. So that's just my comments. I just wanted to follow up with Councillor Pachariva, but I do like your idea of where are we looking and how do we find people with those specific interests. But moving forward, I think it's really important that we have councillors able to participate in the voting to start moving our work plan ahead, because we just have not been able to do that so far this year. So thank you.
Okay, so seeing no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers to report PD 1420 with regards to the review of the Municipal Heritage Committee composition and voting status be received, and that Council approve the draft bylaw to repeal and replace bylaw 2019-50 attached as Appendix A, modifying the Heritage Committee composition and voting status, and direct the town clerk to advertise the member vacancy for the Municipal Heritage Committee. We'll now ask Trish to call out the vote.
Thank you. Please unmute your mic as I call out your name. Councillor Brunei.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Nay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yes.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Injima.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
We have now concluded the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Chair Mikulik to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. Councillor Mikulik.
Thank you very much, Chair McPherson. Just wanted to throw it out there. Is there anybody in favor of a 5-minute recess before we get started on this, or do we want to plow through it? What, Ms. Sarnicki, any thoughts?
If members would like a 5-minute recess, we can do that and come back in 5. I can stop the live streaming for that portion.
Can I just get a show of hands? Can I just get a show of hands? Those that would like to take a 5-minute break? 1, 2. Those that want to plow through it? All right, let's go. All right, so welcome to the General Business and Finance Committee portion of this meeting. 8.1 delegations. We have no delegations this evening for the General Business Finance Committee agenda. So we move to 8.2 consent agenda. We have no consent agenda items this evening. 8.3 reports. We will now consider item 8.3, report FN-06-20 asset management update. Do members of council have any questions or comments? Okay. Pardon me. Oh, Mary Easton.
There's one.
Okay, Mary Easton.
Oh, you're on mute. You have to unmute.
Mr. Chairman, I'll speak to this report because it's just too important to pass it over. It has major implications for the organization, and I'm hoping that that Mr. CAO will be involved to present the report in terms of its overall intentions. There is a significant importance to this document, as has been outlined on page 2 of the report under the first paragraph. It was seen at first as a financial initiative, and it was directed from the province, but I'm going to leave that to the CEO to speak about this. There's a significant intersection of professional disciplines who have to ensure that an asset management plan comes to total fruition. I believe there are significant healthy community and population health indicators that need to be given consideration by those disciplines. And I think that as time goes by, we'll certainly learn more about how it influences our capital decision making. But Mr. Chairman, through you, I'd like to hear more from the CEO on this report.
At your insistence, I shall direct that to our CAO, and should he have any difficulty, I'll ask Terry Troala to help him out.
Well, your cooperation is noted. Thank you, Councillor.
You're very welcome.
Through you, Chair Mikulik, to the Mayor, I always need help from those that are experts in these particular areas. But why don't I start, and then I definitely will turn it over to Terry. And I think, as the Mayor highlighted, this is something that is both legislated and mandated for municipalities to have as we move forward. It is something that Lincoln has been doing for a number of years, albeit I think at more of a rudimentary or basic level. But I think as we mature as an organization, looking at asset management and the objectives that come from asset management are critical. So if I could just highlight some of the goals generally, I think at a very high level around asset management planning. And I think first and foremost, you've heard us talk about the importance of achieving both fiscal stability and fiscal health, and how having an appropriate and adequate asset management plan is critical to that. There is a need, as we heard earlier on when we were talking about climate change, to look at investing both in effective and a business case driven infrastructure. Of course, financial performance and financial sustainability, something we've talked about at length, is one of the goals that we hope to have come out of this. And again, looking at when we look at the cost of our infrastructure, anything we can do to reduce those life cycle costs of the organization's assets is critical. And I think if you were to compound those investments that one can make, even if we were to add a year or 2 years in the long term, that is a substantial savings to the municipality and ultimately the taxpayer. When we look at asset management, we look at return on investment, and we look at how do we preserve our investment. So at the end of the day, this is the start of a process. We've reported to you as far back as 2017. on the new legislation and the new regulations and what's required in that annual review that needs to take place. And so we've been successful with FCM in the Municipal Asset Management Program and a grant of $50,000. And so I will turn it over to Terry to take you through some of the details, but I'll end by highlighting the mayor's point around the importance of the interdisciplinary action of this. As much as this, I think, is a finance-led, finance-driven report, it isn't successful unless all departments are working collaboratively. And so that's fire, that's planning, that's public works, community services, and finance, really working together to map out a roadmap for council ultimately, and by virtue of that, the community. So Terry can probably provide a little bit more in-depth update for you.
So through the chair, first, thank you for asking me to speak about asset management, as I'm always willing to do so. It's a relatively new field, academically speaking. There's a lot of best practices out there in literature, but as you mentioned, it really is a multifunctional exercise where we need to make sure that we're collaborating and that we know what all of the needs are. We need to incorporate all of those lenses, the social determinants of health that you indicated, the climate adaptation, financial or fiscal sustainability, all of those need to be wrapped up together into an asset management plan. And the real point of the asset management plan is to allow evidence-based decision-making, to make sure that the decisions are based on the evidence and also on a long-term planning horizon, and not just what can we afford next year, or even what do we want to do in the next term of council. It's really taking a holistic look. Some of our assets span 30, 40 years. So we need to make sure that we're understanding the replacement cost, what the impact will have if we decide to maintain it, like do some maintenance this year, or do we defer it to next year? Do we replace an asset now or defer it to later? All of those pieces need to come together into the asset management plan in order to provide that evidence. As you mentioned, we have a cross-functional team called the Asset Management Committee. We meet on a monthly basis, but then we're also working with the consultant in order to look at that, the literature base that I was mentioning, and to make sure that we have a common understanding of the goals of our project. And so far that's been the goal, is taking a look at the current state. And as I mentioned in the report, the next focus is going to be to really evaluate the town's current data and the data management techniques, and then go on from there. But we definitely will be coming back to council to keep you updated on kind of any decisions that you may make, but also just to keep you informed of those different best practices that we're going to be implementing. Yeah. Does that answer the question? I feel like I went off on a bit of a asset management.
Mr. Chairman,
No,
could I
appreciate
speak?
your passion. Yes, certainly.
Mr. Chairman, I very much appreciate both perspectives that we've been given on this report, and also to understand best what the next internal step is that's being taken. You know, I want to point out to the council, and you're all very well aware of this, when it comes time for us to discuss our budgets, we do not get very much attention from the public, but it doesn't mean that people don't care about what's going on. And I think it's very important that the process of how we make decisions is laid out for them. So the transparency on this is extremely valuable. And I hope that, and also we have a number of these reports, whether they're master plans or they or they form operational activities, functional activities within the organization, particularly the ones that are legislated, and this one certainly is. This has an impact on how we do business and the cost of doing business. I think that we would really be remiss if we didn't begin to clarify many of these activities with the public so that there is a better understanding of how municipal governments form their budget process. And I appreciate the time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. Thank you for bringing this up. As I too feel it's incredibly important. Balance sheets or bookkeeping. It's not the most glamorous subject. However, it's extremely important to show the strength or weakness of a community. Myself personally, it's tough. Going through balance sheets or income statements, it's tough. And I appreciate those that take the time and the effort to do so. Ultimately, how do we know what we need if we don't know what we have currently? And it's an extremely important subject, and I'm happy. I like reading these sort of reports. Thank you very much. Is there any other questions or comments? Okay. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell. Receive and file report FN-06-20 Asset Management Planning Update. I will now ask our clerk to call the vote.
Please unmute your mic as I call out your name. Councillor Brunei.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yay.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Njima.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
Terrific. Okay, we will now consider item 8.4, Memorandum COVID-19 Information Update. I know the CAO has a few comments to share. Mr. CAO, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. And again, I will look to all the members of our senior team that are here to pick up on anything that I may miss or I may not speak to. I did send council a little bit of an update over the weekend, but also in talking to the clerk and the chair, thought it important that this also make its way to our agenda so that the public may hear and council may ask any questions. The last update that we provided to council was on June 15th. And I think, again, as we've said on a number of occasions, there's a significant amount that changes on a daily and weekly basis as it relates to COVID-19. I will be before you in the coming week to talk a little bit about the financial considerations as we were directed to do. But this report specifically, I think, just puts together some of the highlights that we've been working towards both and from the perspectives of getting our operations back and running, supporting local businesses, economic development, customer service, and preparing our community services in a lot of ways in terms of opening. And so I go in length on both those pages about some of the things we're doing, some of the things we're looking at, the way we're engaging the community. I won't discuss each of them. Again, you've got members of the senior team that are here that can speak to them. So maybe I will let Ms. McKay, Mr. Deanny, and anyone else who wants to speak, maybe highlight a little bit within their areas. But a little bit of a COVID update, something that you've seen at each of these special CAL meetings to date. I think you're going to start seeing us use different phraseology around re-engaging, not just recovery, around reimagining, just not responding. So really kind of moving in a different direction as we prepare for what the rest of 2020 looks like, and then 2021 and beyond. So I will turn it over to Paul and Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, and Chair, through you to the committee. As you can see in the update, both economic development and planning have been working actively with members of our business community towards reopening, whether it be questions around what's allowed through stage 2 or patio expansions and such. We've had an overwhelming positive response in helping our business community navigate stage 2 and again prepare as Niagara moves to stage 3. In addition, our weekly e-newsletter that we've been sending out has really been received positively throughout the business community. In that newsletter, as committee will see, we've been really pointing to some of the information both at the provincial and federal level, as well as what's happening locally, and really trying to connect our businesses to salient points and information as much as needed. So we've had a great response from our business community and continue to help them out in any way we can. Thank you.
And through your chair to members of council, I mean, I think you've been hearing a lot about the reopening through our department as we, as our CAO has said, reimagine our programs and begin to launch. We opened our pools this past weekend, and even though we had some unsettled and unpredictable weather, we still had upwards of almost 200 individuals who registered, booked in, and came out to the 2 pools, the outdoor pools that we have. Our camp program started today, and thus far has gone well. We're starting our swimming lessons in the next couple of weeks and accepting registration. So everything to date has been well received. We continue to reach out to our vulnerable communities and different audiences to seek their impact and their feedback on programming as we go forward. We are doing a survey that will go out to our database on programming in the fall, and we continue to adjust. So we feel confident that as a department, both servicing our community and the residents, as well as servicing our colleagues throughout the town of Lincoln and in preparing our facilities and ensuring we have the appropriate PPE, that we're ready as we move into stage 3 when that is announced. And I'll be happy to answer any specific questions that council may have.
Chair Mikulik, if I could just add a few more comments, and they're specific to, I think, preparing our facilities for reopening and what that looks like. As an emergency operations team and a recovery team, we have spent a considerable amount of time at looking at that. I've been talking to CAOs across the region. Right now, we're doing a number of services, particularly in our legislative services group, around by appointment only, the commissioning of oaths, marriage licenses, and so forth. You're going to see, I think, a gradual reopening as we head into phase 3 of us trying to do as much as possible through a very deliberate process around appointments. But of course, you're also going to see us slowly start to reopen things. We are looking at, again, the Ministry of Labor protocols. We're looking at public health direction and advice around active screening versus passive screening, and what that means when people enter the building here at Town Hall, and how we'll probably have to have one of our customer service reps here, I think, just assisting and guiding, making sure people are sanitizing. So a lot to do. Everyone will have heard that we've entered or have not entered yet, but likely to be entering in the coming week and a half or so, phase 3, and what that means. And so there's a lot of things that now begin to open with phase 3. So there's a lot of preparatory, I think, preparatory items that we need to do and have in place as we head into there. So you'll slowly start to hear, I think, a lot more. Again, we're looking to Chief Hudson, Kathy McGrath, from an emergency management, emergency response perspective. They're also feeding a lot of information back to us in terms of public health protocols, and again, inspections through Ministry of Labor, and conversations are happening. Standard operating procedures are being developed. So,
thank you very much, all, for your comments. Yeah, I think we're all wanting to get back to normal or as best to normal as possible. I'm going to put this to members of council. Do members, any members have questions or comments that they'd like to bring forward? I see Councillor Renchiema.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. I don't have a question, but I wanted to, a big shout out to everybody and how staff generally, and we've heard some of it tonight, but how staff generally has been handling this whole pandemic and the relationship with the community as a whole. What I want to speak of right now is I had a conversation with Shannon McKay and Sarah Ain about the reopening of the pools and the programming that not everybody in every municipality has been able to do. And it was a lot of work and it was a lot of scrambling. There's a lot of detail in there that a lot of you can imagine that has to go into place to facilitate these programs, and shout out. Thank you.
Very good. I'm sure they'll appreciate that shout out. I know I would. We have next Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to speak to the stage 3, and I've of course received a lot of calls from people about the whole issue of the mandated masks, and in doing so, I'm finding that there are certain needs that people have that maybe aren't on that traditional list. So that I would like to add to that list of contacts that could be made are local churches, because they have and are in the process of developing reintegration programs. They want to, they're dealing with a certain amount of fear from people who have not had, in many cases, any contact at all throughout the last 4 months with anybody, never had a meal with anybody but themselves. Very, very little contact beyond telephone or electronic communication. Everyone wants to do the right thing, and I think we heard that certainly in the conversation with the BIA and the chamber. And I'm very grateful, as I'm sure we all are, that we have such a high level of cooperation from those people. So I'd like to know a little bit more about how people who maybe who aren't on that traditional list of those who are producing revenue, but maybe looking at quality of life issues, how we're going to deal with that, who's the right person to contact. And then the public health emphasis, I believe, is on the local interpretation of a lot of rules, and just a little bit more emphasis on that, a little more explanation in terms of the stage 3 reopening, if you will, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. I'll send it off to the CAO for his redirection.
No, it's an excellent question. I mean, churches, I believe, are currently open, operating at roughly a 30% capacity from what I know. I don't see no mention as far as moving forward how many that will get bumped up to. So I'll leave that. Mr. CAO, do you have any comments or thoughts or advice on that?
Through you, Chair Mikulik, and I will look to Ms. McKay and maybe Mr. McDiani, because I think they are doing some outreach with different groups to maybe speak a little bit on the church piece. Everything we've read as it relates to stage 3 continues to keep churches at that 30% capacity. I know Mayor Easton and I spoke earlier today. For a lot of the larger churches, in terms of size and square footage, the 30% remains appropriate, if not adequate. And I think there are some concessions being made. That said, I think we will continue to work with our churches in whatever capacity they require assistance. I think I would suggest, and I know both Shannon and Paul, I think, will attest to it, that any stakeholder, whether it's an individual resident, whether it's a business that employs 100, or whether it's a business that employs 1 or 2, we will all treat them and triage any issues that they may have in the exact same way. But specific to churches, I don't know if right now they've fallen on our kind of outreach contact list, but I look to both Shannon and Paul, who are with their teams, I think, handling the lion's share of kind of the calls we get, specifically Shannon. Paul, for the most part, is a team of one. How much time he's spending in churches, I don't know. But maybe Ms. McKay first can speak to that, and then Paul, if you've got any thoughts. And then, Your Worship, I can speak to a little bit about stage 3.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor and the rest of the members of Council, we haven't made a lot of calls to local churches, but we are very happy to add that group to our list. We are happy to reach out and clarify information as to the best of our ability, as we know it to be. We're happy to provide assurances. We're happy to ask similar questions about, what they're experiencing and how we might assist or provide a role and reach out to those communities. So we're happy to take that on and start building that list. And certainly we already have a list because we have those contacts throughout Lincoln, and just reach out to that group.
Mr. Deanne?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee. So similar to Director McKay's response, we haven't actively spoken to any of the churches in our community. However, having said that, I do believe they're on our distribution list for our weekly newsletter. So I've been getting updates over the past few months, but I'll double check that. And again, as my colleagues had mentioned, always happy to help out any organization or group in our community.
Mary Easton, do you have a further question or
yes, I have a second question, and then I know Mr. Kirkopoulos is going to speak further. I'm very sorry about that, Mr. CAO. The CERB, if the CAO could please include the anticipation of this ending and any planning, any thoughtful planning that may be going on internally about where we anticipate that we might be as these checks come to an end. I think, so far across Niagara, there's been a very good response with people being able to pay their taxes. For the most part, I don't want to overstate that in any way, but I'm just wondering if there is consideration being given to what this people will be experiencing in the future, or whether or not we think with stage 3 opening that people will have the level of security that they require as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think to all of council on this, and again, maybe I'll look to staff if they have anything to add. Right now, we anticipate the CERB ending in September. Again, that is not to say that there couldn't be further changes coming. I think this government at both levels, both across the country and in the province, really is looking at the types of supports that are required. And so while right now it's anticipated to end at the end of September, that could be extended. I know the government has extended business supports to the end of 2020. And interesting enough, we heard last week that Canada saw a job increase in June of close to 1 million new jobs being added back. So while I don't want to say I think moving forward things are progressing well or progressing positively, I think those are interesting indicators and good indicators that I think we can look to. That being said, I know the CAO has received an update from Dr. Urji today, specifically as it relates to phase 3. I think phase 3 and stage 3 and stage 2. There was a thought when stage 2 was first announced that it would stretch anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks. We find ourselves right now approaching 4 weeks, which I think in a lot of ways is an indication of what we're seeing maybe in other jurisdictions. We are close to the border, and while the border is closed, I think there was a thought by Dr. Urgi in that update that the cautious approach of waiting the full 4 weeks in stage 2 was the appropriate approach. Stage 3 does open up, as I've said this evening, a lot more businesses. What that means as we head into August, September, as kids head back to school, and those numbers look like, I think if numbers stay where they are and heading in a positive trend, that's a good indicator for our economy. I think should they once again regress, that is something that we're going to have to continuously evolve and deal with until a vaccine can be found. That could prove to be a lot more challenging. I think we've heard the doctor talk about the key public health indicators that will be a focus both for stage 3 and beyond. And that is virus spread and containment, the health system capacity, the capacity of public health to just deal with these things in terms of its education, and then the incident tracking capacity, which is just the way they do contact tracing and so forth. And so those remain kind of the focuses. All our numbers are trending in the right direction. Last week, we only saw 9 cases here in Niagara, down from 59 cases the week of May 1st to May 7th. So as you can see, progressing definitely in that right direction. But again, the doctor was very clear that we do need to make sure that complacency doesn't set in at this time, that both from a communication standpoint, a public relations standpoint, that we continue to get information out there around wearing masks and physical distancing can occur, hand sanitizing, don't go out when you're sick, and maintain that separation that is appropriate as much as possible. So those are, I think, just some basic comments. There's a lot of information, again, being shared. And do I think our businesses are going to fare well, Mary Easton, as it relates to, I think, some of the supports that are out there? From the perspective of Lincoln, we are going to do everything possible to ensure that from our perspective, we're supporting our businesses and our residents to the extent possible. But we are going to look to senior levels of government for some assistance as it relates to that on some things that are beyond our control. But I think as Councillor Russell and others may have indicated, what that looks like from a delivery of service and a downloading or uploading, I can't necessarily speak to, because I don't think anyone knows at this time.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to thank Mr. CEO very much for those answers. I'm not just asking these questions for the benefit of council. I'm asking these questions for the benefit of the community, because the truths on health indicators, the accuracy of information, to be heard and repeated over and over and over again, is going to benefit everyone. The goal here for all of us is to decrease the amount of fear in our community, which I'm told is quite significant across Niagara right now. And we have a good relationship with our community in Lincoln, and to continually have this information and to be sharing information in the way that we are, I believe, is really in their best interest. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Madame Mayor. I think those are some very wise comments that you've just made there. Just want to, any further questions? Any questions from members of council? Comments? Okay, so I just I have a couple of my own, kind of course. So, Mr. Deaney or Mrs. McKay, I'm surprised that none of the churches had reached out to us. We'd heard from so many different members of the community at all levels. We have several large churches. I'm surprised. Were you at all surprised that they didn't reach out to us, or is everything appear to be okay? Are they understanding? Are they adapting well?
To you, Chair, I'm not 100% confident that they haven't reached out to us. I think my comments were more that We haven't yet reached out to them. So
Okay.
they may, and I can certainly follow up with staff to see if they've reached out to staff with whom they have contacts, or just generally the general inquiries line where staff would take their information, answer their questions, provide them the appropriate information. I think we're very, very happy to do that outreach. But the other comment I would like to make and share with council is that even though we've done this through these unprecedented and difficult times, we do plan to continue this outreach and ongoing, and actually plan to establish a bit of a regular forum with the various organizations that we reached out to, because we're pretty confident that there'll be trends that we have been seeing across organizations and across groups. And so if we can facilitate and assist one group, we're probably able to facilitate and assist other groups in the same way. So those formal outreach meetings and calls and conversations and forums, and we're not sure what format that will take yet, but every group that we've talked to thus far, we've committed to continuing to engage and continue those conversations, because we know even though we may go into stage 3 very soon, that the fear and the stress and the anxiety and the uncertainty isn't immediately going to go away. So we plan to continue to work with all of our groups in Lincoln and our residents.
That sounds very good. I do know that I've heard from members of our community that they've appreciated those phone calls, those outreach phone calls. Just letting, is everything okay? There's value to that. And I know I've heard from members of the community that that's been appreciated. Some of the comments that I'd like to make is I think we're fortunate that we have a very fluid and dynamic staff. This pandemic has been fluid and dynamic. We didn't know what we were getting into at the start. It's ever evolving. I think our decision making has to be flexible. We're making important decisions, and we can even see many in the health industry or the health profession, their thoughts and opinions are fluid as well. And I think it's important for us to always have an open mind and trust the professionals that we rely on. In our case, we do not have within our municipality a health guidance officer, but we do have the regional health, Dr. Herji, or even this Dr. Karim Ali. So, and the other comment I'd like to make is, I really like this report. I like the bullet points. I like the dates. It looks like a report that I would keep handy on my phone with all of these dates. So when somebody asks me, so when's the library opening up? And I can see here quickly, effective June 23rd, the library opened. I just like the bullet point format. I thought it was very easy to read and quick to the point. I thought that was very good. So I'll leave it at that. And one more thing I'd like to say is our economic development officer heard a lot of positive things. There's a lot of things that get thrown our way business-wise. Sometimes reading through that paperwork, reading through that regulation is like skating through mud. And you and your staff and all members of staff have received phone calls and made it easier to navigate through that, what could be a challenging read or an understanding. So people have appreciated that as well. And Mr. Smith, you too, I'm going to acknowledge yourself. Your handling of bylaw has been appreciated by many, and the educational piece it's much better than coming in with an attitude of writing up a fine. So anyways, with that, There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rijema. Receive and file memorandum, COVID-19 information update. I will now ask the clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you. Please unmute your mic as I call out your name. Councillor Brunet.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Yay.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Patriva.
Yes.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Reimer, thank you. Councillor Jimma.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
And that motion is carried.
Okay, so we have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We'll move on to item 9, confidential items. We have no confidential items this evening. Moving on to committee remarks. Do we have any committee remarks? Okay. Ms. Sarnicki, did you happen to see who was first?
Yes, I believe Councillor Brunet was first.
All right, Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. Don't get to say that very often. It's got a nice rhyme to it.
Well, the clerks usually do.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I actually have 3, and I'm looking in my Hollywood Square board on my screen, and I'm seeing Chief Hudson is still with us. So after 4 hours, I'd like to direct this question to the Chief. You know, one of the things that I've struggled with over the last 6 years since 2014 is how, as a municipality, we can better communicate to the public. I would say that over the last 6 years, we've made great strides in that communication. We've moved the needle, but communicating to our residents is still an issue. And this past week, I experienced it firsthand in relationship to the fire ban and the burn permits. And so it's my understanding through you, Mr. Chair, to the fire chief, that the burn permits during COVID were being foregone. In other words, the town hall was shut down, so people didn't have to get a burn permit. I could stand to be corrected on that, but that was my understanding. You know, if I wasn't a counselor, I wouldn't spend as much time on social media as I do. I was never on Twitter prior to being a counselor. I was on Facebook, but didn't use it very much, and I didn't use Instagram. But I can tell you that there's not too many farmers that are on social media. So my question through you to the chief is, how do we communicate to these people that, you know, last week a fire ban was implemented? Because I experienced firsthand with 2 farmers that had burn piles going on, and on a regular basis, they're burning on their property, and they were not aware that the fire ban was in place. I also am very privy to the fact that, unfortunately, we had a situation on one of the streets in our municipality where the fire department, I think, went on site with 3 or 4 vehicles, and now there's a cost to that individual, which is, you know, fairly high. So I'm just looking to see how we can better communicate certain things like fire bans as we move forward, Chief.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think right now, I do believe that that position, that communication piece, Director of Communications, is vacant, but I'll allow the Chief Hudson to answer that question and see if he can shed more light on that as to how the fire department can, you know, pick up the ball a little bit on that one in our current state.
Hey, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I see our CAO has indicated he wants to make some comments as well, so maybe I'll kick it off. So number one, it is a challenge to communicate. What we have done is we have posted this information through the social media channels, through the town, and through our fire department Twitter account. It is posted on the town website, and we've also posted notices on the signboards of the fire stations. So anybody driving by any of the fire stations should be able to see it. There is an article going in the paper this week, and I understand that's not as timely as we would have liked it to have been, but that's kind of what we're dealing with a weekly newspaper as opposed to a daily. In terms of our response to burn complaints, it is still an educational focus. So anyone who is burning during the burn ban is not fined. They're advised that there is a burn ban in place. There is an incident that you did speak of where there were possibly some fines levied, and that was a different issue. That was not anything to do with the burn ban itself. It had to do with what was being burned in the pile, which is never allowed. So we continue to make strides to find better ways to reach out to people. This COVID thing has been a bit of a challenge in terms of with town hall closed, with the fire stations closed to the public. It has been a challenge getting the message out. But as I say, we haven't charged anybody, and if we do have to respond, it is to educate them rather than come down heavy-handed on them.
Excuse me. Sorry, everyone. I have to interject. As per the town's procedural bylaw, in order to extend the meeting past 10 p.m., I have to call for a 2/3 vote. I'm going to now call the vote. You can please unmute yourselves as I call your name. Councillor Bernay.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Yeah.
Councillor Mikulik.
Yay.
Councillor Pachariba.
No.
Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Injima.
Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Support.
Motion is carried to extend. Please continue.
Where were we? Oh, Mr. CEO, did you want to provide further comment?
Just a few comments, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Bernay's question, and I think the Councillor Forrest's question, because it gives us a chance to once again, I think, highlight this particular topic and to share that information. Knowing, part of our audience and the fact that we want to be as inclusive as possible and find every means possible to communicate, there's a few more things that we have done last week. We took out what I would call more conventional ads in News Now. Similarly, we look to do that this week again with the newspaper to make sure that we have both a traditional form of communication, not just social media. And second to that, I know our customer service staff who are fielding calls. Oftentimes for those councillors that have come into the building here, there is a sign out front that says for further information on a number of issues, both from a fire perspective and otherwise, to call our customer service number. And so I know Shannon and her team are fielding a number of calls from individuals, specifically as it relates to fire bans, fire permits, and the process for that. So I think not only are we using social media, but I think we're trying to make sure that we're complementing any of our social media efforts, both with earned media, like the story Chief Hudson was talking about, as well as paid media in the form of advertisements. So,
and I appreciate that, Mr. CEO. I only bring it up, to be honest with you, when the mayor made the comment about COVID and what we're doing with COVID, I thought she brought up a very salient point where she said, I bring it up not for just the benefit of council, but the benefit of community. And I was going to go offline tomorrow, and actually I tried today and just ran out of time to get a hold of Chief Hudson to have this discussion. It's not in any way, shape, or form a knock on the fire department or anybody. It's just, I think I experienced it firsthand where these farmers, they just didn't know. And they're not on social media, and they're not reading the paper. And they've done things for years and years on their farm. And I don't think any of them are doing it with any malice. It's what they do. They burn, and they have a burn pile. So I appreciate that. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just have a couple more if I could continue.
Sure, make it quick.
I thought we had agreed to go beyond that limit. The last time I spoke to Mr. Krikopoulos in person, we had a brief discussion about the regional on-demand transit service. And looking at the calendar, we're almost in the middle of July, and it was my understanding that the region was going to launch on-demand service in August. So I'm just wondering through you, Mr. Chair, if the CAO could maybe just comment on where we are with the on-demand regional transit service.
I just want to apologize to you, Councillor Brunei, but we did have a councillor that voted, that was an objection to extending this meeting further. So hence my make it quick comment, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just disinfecting my hands, making sure I sanitize properly. Thanks, Councillor. You're right. We did have a quick conversation as it relates to on-demand transit. We are anticipating, and I think apropos of your question, Matt Robinson, who's the director of the GO Implementation Office and Transit at Niagara Region, did email me today, once again reiterating that we are in a good place to launch on-demand service as of August 17th, 2020, so a little over a month from now. They do have a presentation at the regional level at the Public Works Committee, which is actually tomorrow at the region, I believe. They are working from a legal perspective, and by legal, I mean Niagara Region legal, to draft a MOU that needs to go to Niagara Region. They will be sharing that MOU with us here at the town of Lincoln once it's complete. I'm hoping by this week. As I said, in-house Region Legal is developing an MOU in terms of just the process for them to actually run the service for us. And so I will be sharing that with council. I haven't actually reviewed that. I don't know if it needs council approval, Councillor Brunei, but I will definitely be sharing it with council. And because timing is of any essence, I will hopefully get it to you in time for the Monday, July 20th committee, exactly a week from today. So as soon as I get it, I will share it with council. I'm told really it is just merely an MOU that looks at the region doing the service for us, which in a number of reports we've already approved. But I think I wanted to also share that with you. So August 17th, launch date. I know Director Graham sent me a quick update as well today, and communication and outreach will be launching in the next couple of weeks so that the information on this new on-demand service can get out there.
Thank you very much, Mr. CEO. Mr. Chair, I just have one more remark. I don't need a response from staff, but if I could just make one more comment.
Yep, certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I believe it's been about 2 years ago. I could be wrong on the timing, but I'm going to say it was about 2 years ago. We had a report come from the planning department, and it was to do with surplus property. And, you know, there was property that was identified throughout the town, and I believe that the value that was assessed on that was in excess of about $2 million. I could be wrong, plus or minus. I only bring it up as we go into what could conceivably be one of the toughest budgets that council has had to look at over the next number of years with COVID and how we come out of this. I'm just wondering if it is possible, if we could get an update on that surplus property. From my memory, there was property on Poplar Lane off of Hillview Drive, Elizabeth Street Park. There was a couple of properties on Stottlebyre, and we've already purchased the property on Mountain Street, which was the Blue House. So I'm just wondering if, as we go into a tough budget season, if there could be an update on that surplus property report. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for indulging me.
No, I think that's excellent point. We are talking asset management tonight, and we are moving, you know, it's best to know these thoughts, you know, before the budget process. So, Mr. CEO, did you want to respond at all, or
through you, Mr. Chair,
just take that in advisement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I you know, I don't have the details right here. I can connect with both planning and economic development and get an update. In community services as well, and prepare an update for council. But yeah, absolutely, I agree with the council. I agree with the council, the councillor, I think wholeheartedly in terms of using that as a mitigating factor as much and where possible. We do have a few updates on some of the properties, specifically where we thought development potentially could happen. And so there are some details, both from a geotechnical perspective and a planning perspective, that we can share with council. But there's also some additional properties that were on that list. So
thank you very much.
You know, I'll end, I think, just by saying that we are, and I agree a lot with what the councillor said, we are going to look at all avenues to reduce the budgetary expenditures, and surplus properties is one of them.
Very good. Next, I have Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have two items. The first item is to, again, to update council, but also the public on very energetic measures that council and staff have been taking on the issue of road safety and the truck blitz that was done a few weeks ago. I bring this up because the CAO and I have a meeting tomorrow with Sean Perron, who is the new commander of the 8th District of Niagara Regional Police Services located in Grimsby. And we're going to be talking with him about the constant noise issues in the community and to see what measures can be taken. We have a number of the members of the public who are actually keeping diaries on some of these vehicles that are becoming extremely disruptive and really impacting people's quality of life. So that's for information, but I appreciate all the interventions that have been taken both by councillors and staff because we are not, and also Councillor Foster, Regional Councillor Foster, we have not taken our eyes off the goal in terms of this, but my goodness, everything really does move pretty slowly, and it has nothing to do with COVID. It's just the way these very complex issues are to deal with. So I spoke with today with Mr. Bruder about the site alteration and fill issue that that has been brought forward, and it will be coming back again because it is my belief that these trucks that are bringing soil into the community where it has absolutely, it serves no purpose for the municipality, these need to be eliminated. And the elimination of trucks and the weight of those trucks and the impact on our roads is all part and parcel of the agenda that this council has been working and the previous council has been working on for over 6 years. So I just want to publicly make sure that everyone is aware that there's no one is asleep at the switch on this, but this is a very, very hard portfolio. And secondly, Mr. Chair, I want to formally advise that, first of all, and I'm really glad that Councillor Pachariba a request to get off of this this call didn't go through because I wanted to thank him for being an excellent deputy mayor over the last months since the beginning of the COVID situation. Councillor Pachariba is the longest serving councillor, so his performance, of course, was exactly what I would expect, and he delivered. There's no question about it. I want to also thank Councillor Paul McPherson for being the second during that process. And actually, I feel that in terms of our role as a small caucus when we required it, working with the staff was very beneficial and very much in balance with what we have in mind when we talk about delegated authority. The delegated authority activities are very beneficial when we are in that kind of a situation where the CAO must act. But I think the gap, I guess, or the protection, if you want to use those words for the public, is that we still have 3 people, myself, the deputy mayor, and another experienced councillor who are part and parcel of those decisions. And I'm very pleased that we put that, that intervention in place. So at the end of September, Mr. Chairman, you yourself are scheduled to be the deputy mayor. And I will make certain that given the circumstances that we also have one other person, because I feel that as long as the emergency measures are in place, that is the prudent way for us to govern in this community. And that is all I have to say. I just wanted to bring everyone up to date. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. I know that I saw Councillor Pachariva couldn't wipe the smile off his face, woke him up there. I think he appreciated those comments. We have Councillor McPherson.
Yes, just quickly, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let everybody know that Councillor Mikulik and I sat in on a fairly lengthy meeting with the CAO, Director of Planning, and Walter Neubauer to review the plans for the Jordan Improvement Project. And not to get into all the details here, but we will be seeing a report come back, I believe, at the next committee meeting with more detail on what that looks like. And I think you'll all be very excited with the results. It is an absolutely stunning project. And the good news is that it looks like we're going to get going with it this year with the burying of the lines. And then over the next 2 years, the construction of 19th Street and Main Street Jordan, followed by 2023, any other items that need to be completed, such as potentially the parking lot behind the fire hall. So very, very excited to see that after who knows how long, 20, 25 years, we are going to see this project come to fruition, and it's going to be spectacular. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I 100% agree with, it was an exciting meeting, definitely, and look forward to seeing that move forward. I thought Mayor's comments with regards to having that mini caucus, I thought that was an excellent Made in Lincoln solution during that pandemic. I like the creativity of that, and I thought it worked really well. It was nice having a representative from each end of town, you know, that any of us could access at, you know, any given time should we not have been able to access the mayor or the CAO. I thought that was an excellent way of decision-making through the difficult times. All right, I don't see any other hands up. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 10:17 p.m.